Kia ora and welcome to the Wiggly Niche Cast. I am the Diggity Doodah Doc, as always, joined by the Wobbly Wildcard, and today we are here to talk through Game of Thrones, strictly 20-25 minutes of Game of Thrones jibber jabber, because we had the Game of Thrones Season 8 trailer released, and it's just a good time to preview Season 8 Game of Thrones and talk our shit about Game of Thrones. But first, we got a superstar in the midst.
Do we?
The Wobbly Wildcard. He was invited to talk Wellington Phoenix with Jason Pine, aka Piney Pino.
The Pine Star.
And this was it's a interesting thought because, you know, we're here to revolutionise the Kiwi sporting media landscape, and here is the Wildcard thrown back to the old radio sport. It's somehow radio sport still has listeners. No offense to Piney. We all know Piney is one of the mastermind Wellington Phoenix jokers out there, and he is employed by radio sport, so shout out to him. Shout out to radio sport for giving us the little plug. But yeah, it's just radio sport is so weird when they're talking about, you know, Black Caps and rugby league, the Warriors and all sorts of other sports. The radio sport is just the weirdest place in Aotearoa, even though it's not a place. But I'm with the superstar Wildcard. It was a coming together of Wellington Phoenix powerhouses. Wildcard, kia ora, talofa, namaste, how are ya? And what were your thoughts on your chat with Piney about the Wellington Phoenix?
Yeah, would you believe that Jason Pine, his conversational off-air voice, exactly the same as his conversational on-air voice? What a nice fella, eh? What a nice fella. Just a good old genuine bloke with a very, he's got that, like, what would you call it? He's got that, like, welcoming laugh, you know? It's very, makes you feel like he thinks your joke is the funniest thing in the world. I can't remember what I said beforehand, but he cracked up laughing at it, and I thought, okay, here we go. No, good chat, though. Good chat.
Well, someone thought you were funny.
Yeah, I know. It's just a nice old conversational piece, isn't it? Just being a listener, being someone who can listen when he's a person who's hired to talk. I don't know that a lot of radio fellas actually have that capability, if you're being totally honest about it. I think a lot of people just like to get into those kind of jobs in order to, like, throw their opinion around, and their opinion tends to get stretched far and wide, often rather thin because of the limits of their the gap between their knowledge and what they think they know.
As a great Diggity Doodah Doc once said, you got two ears and one mouth.
Hey, there you go.
You got to do a whole lot more listening than you do talking. With any you in that chat with Piney, you suggested that Wellington Phoenix, their attack and their attacking prowess had kind of fallen away a bit during their recent plateau. They came out, they scored an absolute shitload of goals against Central Coast that led to the Central Coast Mariners coach being sacked. So you were, I don't know if you're prophetic in your words, but that leads me into my question regarding that.
Influential, I think is the word.
Influential. You had a great influence on the Wellington Phoenix's performance and would expect nothing less. With any other takeaways either about the Wellington Phoenix from your chat with Piney, or about the whole, like, pulling back the curtain, and with any takeaways on how the chat worked with Piney, how the radio sport, you know, that stuff works? Any takeaway from the chat with Piney about Wellington Phoenix or about your chat with Piney?
Not so much on the Wellington Phoenix, I suppose. I mean, the chat itself, he just messaged us on Twitter being like, hey, who writes your Phoenix stuff? You want to come on the radio? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? And it was sort of like just arranged a time to pre-record it, all pre-recorded, obviously. And I just sat in the exact same seat I'm sitting in now that I sitting to do the podcast, and gave him a number, got a pop on the phone, said, g'day, how are ya? He said, hi, it's Jason Pine here from Radio Sport, how are you? And then, just like knocked out a 10-minute little chat. The first thing I wanted to do, because of course I'm intensely aware that any such opportunity like that is branding for the niche cache. First thing I wanted to do was start off just first impressions sound sort of like sharp and young and energetic and fun. And so the first thing I did was call him, I just said something along the lines of, Piney, g'day, old mate, how you going? And thinking Stephen Adams would be so proud of me for sneaking an old mate in my first, radio sport appearance like that. But nah, they got the chop. They had to squeeze the interview in. They cut out the bits at the very start and the bits at the very end, which perhaps didn't pertain to the subject at hand, and I didn't quite get that one through the editors, but yeah, no, that's how it works. I was just chatting on my phone for a while. You could hear it. It was on my phone. It wasn't the utmost radio broadcast quality, but hey, so it goes.
And so that's something that other people listening might not be aware of, that a lot of it is pre-recorded. When you're listening to an interview, it's probably been done in the day, in prior that day, or in the day prior to the interview being recorded. That way any interview can be edited down and it can be squeezed in where it fits, and that allows them more flexibility to put interviews into different places if someone who is going live can't show up or whatever. So it is important to remember that a lot of the interviews you hear on radio are pre-recorded. And just to, I'm sitting here, the photo for this podcast will be my exact location right now, so you can get a picture of that.
Beauty.
I'm sitting here overlooking the Pacific Ocean, but I want you to describe your location right now where you recorded the first ever Radio Sport Niche Cache interview. Can you just paint the picture and get very creative, set the juices flowing for this Game of Thrones chat, because I think it's an important historic note in our Niche Cache timeline.
Yeah, right. So I'm sitting in a rather ratty second-hand chair with my computer perched on the back end of a table tennis table, microphone sitting next to it, phone sitting underneath that. Got the lights off because there's one of those perspex type panels across the top of the garage here that I'm sitting in, which means that just enough light squeezes through between the trees around it. Bit of a I won't call it an old school country shack, because it's not. It's a proper steel garage, but rather crowded with just junk and stuff that doesn't fit in the house. Yeah, it's not the I don't exactly have the scenic view right now, but I could open the door and get one. But then of course all you'd hear would be cicadas, so
that's amazing. That is a piece of niche cache folklore. That rightio, wildcard. We've prepared for the Game of Thrones season 8. We've watched the trailer to get this conversation flowing. Again, just major takeaways and learnings and ideas. You watched the trailer. What were you thinking after watching the trailer? Not so much how you're feeling, because that last scene of the trailer is when the whether it's the Night King or one of his horsemen kind of creeping up on the battlefield, that just sends chills through your spine. It gets you just fired up for Game of Thrones. So not so much the feeling, but just one idea that you had from the trailer specifically for Season 8 Game of Thrones.
Well, my first idea was how far behind I felt after, 17 months since the last episode. And it's just sort of in season, go all in, out of season, let myself go a little bit. Had to work up on my pre-season fitness before we did this podcast, so I think I've mostly caught up on the old plot lines and stuff. I guess it would just be a general sense of anticipation rather than anything plot developed. I think when it comes to the storylines, I felt a little bit let down in season 7, but I'm willing to trust that the fellas in control have enough money in the bank to come through with a massive season 8, considering this is what everything's been building towards. So I don't feel like I need to be skeptical about that. I feel like I just got to sort of let go and enjoy the ride and let the storytellers take me where the storytellers want to go. and there are a bunch of storytellers now, because it's not just interpreting George Martin's books, because they've gone so far off script in that point, because they've gone so far beyond the books, and not having a book to catch up on in the middle of the seasons, which is what I used to have. Little bit of an odd one, but I guess it wouldn't have done me much help anyway in terms of the film, in terms of the show, because they're not really following those books anymore. I don't know. I want to watch the trailer again now. I need to watch it again since doing all my research, I guess. What did you take from it, Doc?
There are a couple of ideas that I eventually learned after continuing my rather excessive fandom, which has me in a complete opposite situation to you. Like, I've been absorbing all sorts of crazy ideas and theories for pretty much a year and a half now, so I'm kind of Game of Thrones crazy at this point. But all of the trailer kind of centered around what seemed to be the battle for Winterfell between the dead and the living. You did have some Cersei interaction. You did have the Golden Company arriving. They were on the boats, the Greyjoy boats. So there was some pointing to King's Landing and what's going to happen with Cersei. But the bulk of it was Winterfell preparing for battle. And it depends whether, because there's quite some conjecture in the fandom about where Arya Stark was running. Was she running in Winterfell? Was she running in King's Landing throughout the tombs or underground or wherever it was? But the bulk of the trailer was set in the north, and the bulk of the trailer revolved around the battle pretty much for Winterfell. That's interesting when you consider that all of that is probably going to happen like in the first 3 episodes. Whether you've put a whole lot of research and intent into understanding what might happen throughout season 8, or whether you're just connecting the dots. Like the Night's King, he's right there. He just crossed past the wall in the season 7 finale, and Winterfell is the first major town after the wall. So logistically, the battle for Winterfell was going to come pretty early on in season 8. Like, they're not going to fuck around for multiple episodes while the Night King like sorts his shit out, gets some more troops. No, he's going straight for the jugular. He's going to destroy any town on his way, and then he's going to come to Winterfell because there's some fairly hefty connections between the Night King and Winterfell. So that leaves you like wondering, like, how is the rest of the season going to be filled out if that major battle takes place at Winterfell early on in the season? I'm predicting that the battle will start probably in episode 2 and then continue on through to episode 3. And that just opens your mind up to a whole other like aspects, like what's going to happen with Cersei, what's going to happen, because it doesn't feel like Winterfell's going to be able to stop the Night King and all those dead folk. So it kind of leads into like what's going to happen after that, and that's where it becomes a whole lot less predictable. A couple of interesting ideas that you learn after watching the trailer and then doing some research is that they intentionally darken the trailer. Like, historically, Game of Thrones has been a like not I don't want to say like a dark series in the sense of like doom and gloom, but when you see it visually, it's very dark. It's not like light and vibrant and woo. No, it's very gloomy visually. And then in the trailer, they darkened it even more so that you couldn't see what was really happening. So you couldn't really see who was chasing Arya.
Sneaky.
Is it Arya? Is it Arya or Ira?
Arya? Arya?
Yeah, I'm just
saying, it depends, because you can say it in a sort of posh King's Landing accent or in a gruff Northerners accent.
Arya, yes, I had a mindfuck there. And then other stuff like the dragons were flying, but they could have removed the people who were flying, who were riding the dragons. So when you see it in the trailer, there's just 2 dragons flying, but perhaps when we see it in the TV show, in the series, you will see Jon and Daenerys riding the dragons.
Yeah, well, it's all CGI anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, so a couple people pointed to like a black dot being on top of the dragon, and that's where they just removed the rider being on the dragon. So there's those sorts of tricks that you can play in the trailer and kind of hide key story elements and then bring them up in the series. Like, so many people have now done videos on YouTube of like bringing a whole lot more light to the trailer and exposing a few different aspects of the trailer and going through that. So it's there's just so much craziness about like who is chasing Arya, because we know that Arya is a warrior. She's not going to fucking run from anyone. She's going to stand there and shank whoever's in front of her. She doesn't back down from a fight, and yet here she is running shit scared through a bunch of underground hallways. So the mere fact that Arya is running away sets your mind in like, why is she running away? Who's she running away from? And stuff like that. So a couple of interesting thoughts there.
Yeah, so 3 major things happened in the season 7 finale. The first one has no real relevance on what's happening now, which is that the Stark kids ganged up on Littlefinger, beat him at his own game, and Arya shanked him in the throat. So that one's just a sort of like a full stop. That's just ending a storyline. The other 2 are pretty relevant in terms of what's going to happen now, because you had Jon and Daenerys pretty much like, well, I mean, they hooked up at the end, didn't they? But before that, they had already sort of combined forces. Jon had sworn fealty to her. They had gone down south to get Cersei on board in terms of the like upcoming massive scrap for the future existence of humanity in this world. And Cersei initially said no because she didn't like that. She didn't like that Jon was well. She told Jon that he had to accept her as the true queen, but he said he's already accepted Daenerys as the queen, and Cersei didn't want to bar that. Tyrion ended up convincing her that she should send her troops north to fight the wall, and then whatever differences they have, they can sort out afterwards. So that's where that ended, Jon and Dany going back north. But then at the same time, you find out at the end that Cersei was actually being a bit of a sneak, and this is the second main one. You think that old Euron Greyjoy had snuck away because he was freaked out about the White Walker that they showed him. Turns out he'd actually just gone off in a pre-planned ruse to go and pick up the Golden Company, who are a massive army of mercenary soldiers, and what do they call the Lannisters now have heaps of money because they sacked the Tyrells, who had all the money in pretty much all the money in the world. They paid off all their debt. Now they can afford a massive army. So it doesn't really matter that they don't particularly have any allies left. At the same time, she's probably going to use those forces to try and destroy the forces in the north without worrying about the White Walkers, thinking either that or she's going to let them like scrap it out and she's going to wait and take care of whoever's left over in her own ideas. Major plot development that Tyrion managed to spot in that one big scene, the old Emmy nomination type scene where he really poured his heart out and she poured her heart out back, but you could tell they were both holding some things up their sleeve. Turns out Cersei's pregnant again, so that's a major factor in all her thinking. Lost every other one of her kids, wants to do right this time. Her version of right, not the same as anyone else's. So we've got this sneaky situation where Jon and Dany are heading back to Winterfell with all of their, various allies, and supposedly probably in the first scene of the show, we're going to get Sansa declaring for Daenerys. At least that's the hint from the episode description. And we've got Cersei doing God knows what, gonna wreak absolute havoc and ruin everything for everyone. At least that's the impression. I mean, we're in a little bit of a delicate place because there aren't as many sort of like empty threads, as there usually are going into a season. We're pretty much like single-mindedly focused on this one thing. Winter has come. The final scene of the last show was the undead dragon just destroying the wall with like blue flames and all that. Not Thoros, he's dead. He got eaten by a bear. Lord Beric and Tormund were hanging on that castle down the other side of the wall where they're supposedly protecting it, and they see this dragon and all these White Walkers, and they just like turn and run, basically, hands waving in the air, saying, "Save me, save me, save me." And they've come through the wall. They're marching on Winterfell. We don't know what Cersei's doing with her amassed army. Jon and Dany are heading back to Winterfell. They're caught in the middle of it all. It's not like I don't think we're going to get that thing that we used to have where you just get like entire episodes where major characters don't feature because we're focusing on these like 3 or 4 people this time, and we're jumping from scene to scene to scene, from location to location. Everyone's pretty much sorted into one of 3 categories. You're with Cersei, you're with Jon and Dany, or you're with the undead people. And that's it's a sharp focus, but it's going to be the entirety of the focus. I read that the Battle for Winterfell is going to be the most expensive battle scene ever recorded or ever filmed in television history, so I think that strongly suggests that it's going to be a largely CGI funded thing involving a lot of dragons, which means that we're probably looking at the attack from further north rather than further south. It's perilously balanced, isn't it?
Suggest that the Battle for Winterfell is like, obviously there's going to be dragons and a lot of CGI. There's probably going to be direwolves as well, which
for sure
adds to the budget. But like we're looking at a whole season, a whole episode. Sorry,
movie length episodes as well. So we're probably going to get an entire Battle of Winterfell is probably going to be 90 minutes long, just pure like fighting.
Yeah, so that's I'd say that's a big reason why that battle is going to be so expensive, because it's going to go for so long, and you're going to be following numerous characters in the battle and how they go about the battle. You broke it up into 3 categories: the dead, Cersei, and Dany. There's 2 notes on that. I strongly believe Dany is pregnant as well with Jon's baby, her nephew's baby.
Yeah, the implications of that, eh? Although, to be fair, Targaryens, the long history of incest, that's why they're all insane.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of implications. It's just, it is what it is. It adds like a bit of weirdness to the whole situation. But I don't think it's Dany's category. I think it's Jon's category. So you got Cersei, Jon, and the dead. Like, Jon is Dany's mission to come to Westeros and take Westeros over. It's all over. I don't really see her having a major role in any of this, but that's not to lessen her importance. Her importance is that everything she has gone through and everything she has done to this point has got her to this point. So where she has met with Jon, where the identity has become clearer, where dragons have come to Westeros. So everything Dany's done is snowballed into the next action. As with any of our lives, like any journey we take, we open a door, then we choose to open another door that leads us to our destiny as such. But from this point on, Dany's arrival in Westeros happened. She's got every intention to break the wheel, which is kind of thrown out now. I think that overall idea might become important after the battle against the dead, because that will be how they wish to rebuild Westeros, assuming they have that opportunity.
Yeah. Right.
But the key point here is that it's Jon. It's all Jon Snow. Dany is she's not the side piece. She is extremely important because of who she is, what she offers. But the story is now going to turn more to Jon, because he is.
Well, he's the rightful heir, isn't he? Like that, I had them as 1A and 1B, but technically Daenerys's claim to the throne is on being a Targaryen, being the youngest kid of the Mad King. But Jon Snow, now who we know was born as Aegon Targaryen, which is weird because Aegon is also the name of, I think, his uncle or something like that. They just go through the same 5 names or whatever, I guess. Probably part of that whole incest culture, and technically as the oldest son of the of the oldest son or whatever it was. He might have been the second oldest son, but he was the one who would have taken over as king after the Mad King was killed. And he only lived a couple more days or something like that because of Robert's rebellion. All this history that we didn't quite get the full picture of yet. I wonder if they'll like. Actually, that's a thought. I'll come back to that. But yeah, Jon technically has a higher claim to the throne than Daenerys, and it's not like old mate Gendry who has a claim to the throne if you believe that Robert Baratheon was a rightful king and that he should be the one. It's like a debate whether you follow that lead or that lead, but Dany's lead is the same lead as Jon Snow's, and he is higher up in the chain now. They don't realize this yet. They're about to find out when Bran and Samwell tell them this when they get back to Winterfell, but Jon is actually further, like, higher up in line. He is the rightful heir by that line of thinking, by the Targaryen line of thinking that Robert was a usurper and none of that counts. Jon should be the next king of Westeros.
But none of that matters.
I mean, they could always end up sharing it anyway, but
it literally doesn't matter who is the rightful heir. That's like, it doesn't matter if Dany. Like, even if Dany feels some sort of way, like she feels, I did all of this just for Jon Snow to be the rightful heir. She probably will do that. Like, no, she has developed as a person that she will be willing to accept Jon as the rightful heir. But the rightful heir doesn't even matter, so we won't get to that point. Like, I can't take seriously any discussion about the importance, the relevance of who is the rightful heir.
Well, Robert wasn't the rightful heir, was he? He just took the throne. So that's
no, but
kind of a precedent.
It's not about that. It's that it's not even about that. It's that Jon Snow is the hero who the whole story revolves around. That's so much more important than who is the rightful heir of Westeros, because Jon Snow is going to be the one who has to deal with what the Night King wants. It's going to be Jon Snow and Bran Stark. They are the most important people based on... Like, Jon is the Song of Fire and Ice. So it's not about whether he's the rightful heir. It's what role being the Song of Fire and Ice plays in ending this whole shitty situation they've found themselves in. Like, the whole thing about Game of Thrones is that you've had this illusion about the throne. You've had politics to try and win the throne. You've had everyone wanting to be the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and whatnot. Yet throughout the whole TV series, that narrative has been juxtaposed against it not really mattering because the dead are coming. Like, that's been a tension throughout the storyline, the two narratives between the throne and the dead are coming. Now, the storyline of the throne is just thrown out because the dead are here. So, whoever's the heir to the throne doesn't matter. And even in the wash-up, it's not going to matter because whoever saves the day, which I think is going to be Jon Snow and Bran Stark, they are going to dictate who, if anyone sits on the throne. Because the whole purpose of breaking the will that Dany has come to Westeros for might lead to a more democratic solution where you've got, various rulers and you don't have one person fighting for the throne. So, like, my ideas of who is the rightful heir doesn't matter at all. What matters in that regard is Jon understanding his lineage in the context of who he is as a person and what that means going forward in the battle against the dead. Because if Jon understands that he is a Targaryen, he's not going to care about the rightful heir. Like, this idea will be brought up. Like, it's going to be brought up, but the importance of it will be quickly swept aside because Jon realizing that he's a Targaryen and that he can ride a dragon is going to be a whole lot more important to this specific situation than him and Dany worrying about who is the rightful heir to the throne.
Well, I have a prediction to make on that whole situation anyway. I think Dany will end up as the Queen of Westeros, and I think Jon will be the one to defeat the Night King. And I have a sneaky suspicion that old Johnny Boy might not be alive by the end of how many episodes is it? 6 or 7? I think it might be 6. I have a sneaky suspicion he won't be alive at the end of season 8, episode 6. Maybe it'll be a sacrificial thing, like he has to sacrifice himself to save the nation. Maybe it'll be something else, I don't know, but maybe it'll just be some crazy accident. But I think that whole thing about him dying and being reborn, he seems to still have a lot of guilt about that, and I think he maybe won't value his life as much as others who haven't, had 2 shots at the whole thing. I don't know. That's just a little teaser I'll throw out there. I think we're not done yet with the killing of crucial and beloved characters. It's been there from the very start of the show, so we might as well be there at the end as well.
It's hard to envision a situation where Dany and Jon survive the season,
especially just from a story writing narrative perspective, because there is that complication of, are we just going to let, it's one thing for the Lannisters, brother and sister, but are we going to let this aunt and nephew just get married, rule the world? And is that just too convenient? Are we I don't know. I think it would make more sense from a storytelling perspective if one of them dies, and I think that's surely going to be Jon, because he's already died once. He is also the guy who is front row of the battle.
I'll finish my spiel with this, and you can touch on anything else. If Jon and Dany do survive the season, I believe it will come with one of them, probably Jon, having to kill Bran, and that will be the hurt at the end of the season.
It's funny you say that, because I had 2 more things I was going to touch upon. The one I hinted at earlier is that thinking about what I was saying at the start, there isn't a whole lot of narrative left to cover, considering there are 6 movie-length episodes. Every one of these episodes is going to be at least 70 minutes long. None of those 45 to 50-minute little children's episodes of the early days. We're getting long, getting big old televisional events. And I wonder if there just isn't as much story left to cover once you get past the big battles and the immediate focuses. And so I have a sneaky suspicion, another one of these sneaky suspicions, I got a couple of them. I have a sneaky suspicion that we're going to see a fair bit of this final season told in backstory. The whole Robert's Rebellion type thing. We've seen glimpses of it before, probably through the guise of Bran and his what do they call it? His green sights or whatever it is. And that leads me to my second thought, which is either you can either look at it as Bran has gone north of the wall, he studied with the Three-Eyed Raven, he has effectively become the Three-Eyed Raven. Becoming the Three-Eyed Raven has made him a little bit weird to his siblings. I think Sansa was definitely kind of uncomfortable with the fact that Bran just randomly knows everything that's ever happened, as long as he, he doesn't know it inherently, but he has access to all the books, effectively, metaphorically, in his head. He can look up any old event that ever happened. And he knows what Sansa went through with Ramsay, for one thing, and I think that's kind of embarrassing for her. I think there's probably some shame and guilt there that she needs to work through, and probably will. And, it's kind of put Bran's positioning in that family in a weird state. And I know there are hints that maybe Bran is supposed to develop as the Night's King or some heir to the Night's King, or he's at this sort of perilous kind of situation on a bit of a precipice. Is he gonna, could he be turned or whatever? And is also the whole thing about the knowledge that he has, and his sort of skill set has been in order to develop that knowledge to be able to tell Jon Snow his rightful lineage. And what does Bran do beyond that is my question. What does Bran have a further fate in the story, or is he a little bit more expendable now? Because you know what happens to characters in Game of Thrones when they get expendable, and I don't know. I think Bran's in a strange situation where I could see him, being lured into doing things, maybe not necessarily evil, but things that he he perhaps lacks the overall wisdom to know. Like, he has the wisdom, he has the knowledge, but does he have the experience to understand how to use that wisdom and knowledge? That's the thing that I'm a little ponderous about, because presumably he's been like sort of put on ice for a long time. Presumably he's gonna have a massive role to play in this final season. I just can't for the goddamn life of me think what it's gonna be.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah, what do you reckon? Simmer on that one?
We'll wrap it up there for the Game of Thrones Nichecast Season 8 preview. We intend to be back before the Warriors, the Aotearoa Warriors, take on the Canterbury Bulldogs in round 1 of the NRL. So we will be previewing that and any other NRL topics that tickle the fancy. Wildcard, what are you writing about over the next few days?
Ooh, let me think. Just finishing up a thing on the Football Ferns squad to play Norway next month. We've got some Steven Adams at some point. I think I'm probably going to do a less typical Steven Adams, Kiwi Steve thing, where because there's been a lot of games all in a hurry, I think I'm going to look at a little bit more of a bigger picture there, because I don't know, there seems to be just a little bit of backlash coming at him because his performances haven't been quite where they were sort of in that November-December range, and I'd like to apply a little bit of context to that. I might even do a little bit of what I've learned wrapping up the old Game of Thrones thing, so that other people in that situation can like pick up the recaps and sort of like find those little find the breadcrumbs and lead them back to where they finished off at the end of last season. Something along those lines. That's 3 things anyway. It won't be all that I write this week, but that's 3 things.
Lovely jubbly. Start of the NRL season. Busy times. Got a bit of cricket on it as well. This is the crossover period. I think we've got 2 of them every year where you've got different sports just merging all together, and shit gets a bit crazy. So got to get down, get the grind, get the hustle on, churn out the content for the beautiful fans of the Niche Cache. Kia kaha. Ja bless. Peace and love to you all. Stay positive. Goodbye.